Hello and welcome to the first episode of SideQuest from Minor Realm Games. I'm Alex, and this is Bill. This podcast covers a wide range of topics in the tabletop RPG world.
And I am super excited to be back with you all as well. I brought my good friend Alex here. We're going to be doing a SideQuest series for the next few months together, talking about various topics. As Alex said, all things tabletop RPG. I wanted to take a quick moment to thank you all. To thank you for listening to this podcast, for supporting RealmCast, for checking us out on Twitch as we continue to stream original Minor Realm Games content. I wanted to just take a quick second as well to thank all of you who have been pitching in and helping to donate in our campaign months throughout June and July for worthy nonprofits and charitable organizations. Thank you all so much. I think we have a really cool episode in store for you. The SideQuest thing's a little new for us. Alex and I are still figuring out the format for it. I'll be completely frank with you. But I think Alex has brought some really interesting ideas today. I think today, this first episode of RealmCast SideQuest is all about characters. And I know, Alex, you had a bunch of stuff prepared, so why don't we just go ahead and get started?
Absolutely, Bill. Hey, man, I'm real pumped up to be here, and thanks for inviting me and be a part of this. So how did you get into tabletop role-playing? Like, so from the beginning, baby Bill in the tabletop world.
I guess it probably starts for me, and this is just sort of for, I guess, probably a little of your edification as well as our listeners. It really started well before formal sort of tabletop role-playing games or Dungeons and Dragons or anything like that for me. It started with me playing a lot of make-believe as a kid.
Absolutely.
I just writing stories and making up different characters for my action figures and scenarios on the living room floor. I think that sort of matured into my friends and I sort of, playing with cap guns and toys around the neighborhood and pretending we were spies. And, and then, as I got older, I was on the internet and I was playing these sort of like online sort of storytelling RPGs with people, where you just kind of tell stories. We would do like pro wrestling and fantasy and all sort of things back and forth over these like chat rooms. And I always found that really exciting. And then I guess sometime in high school, is when I stumbled upon Dungeons and Dragons. Some friends of mine had played. I was fascinated by the idea. I kind of got interested. I bought some dice, bought a book, and then I was sort of whisked away into the world of tabletop role-playing gaming from there. I have to admit, I took a little time off in between, but I'd say for the better part now, 13 plus years or so, I've been running games, writing games, and playing in different top role-playing games. Mostly, I would say D&D in the beginning of it. Now I play all sorts of different systems. I think there's a lot of really interesting, cool stuff out there. But yeah, man, I mean, I think it was sort of overhearing, hey, I'm going to go play Dungeons and Dragons. There's a good friend of mine. We were all hanging out, playing a lot of music together. We're in a band. He mentioned, oh, I have a D&D group. I'm busy that night. And we were kind of like, what? And it was just, I kept hearing more and more people talk about Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role playing. Really, I think if you look back like pre-2010, it was kind of a little bit of a tough time for the industry and for the hobby. It certainly wasn't looked at in the light that I think we are experiencing now, just a decade or more later. But I guess I would ask. In return. I know a little bit of your story, but for the listeners out there, how did you get started, Alex?
So I essentially started the exact same way that you did. Make believe when I was a kid. Cops and robbers, so on and so forth. And it was like middle school, high school when I got started. And a friend of mine, you hear this about the guys that played back in the 90s where all they had was the monster manual and then they figured it out and made it up from there. Like, we were those guys. My friend just had the monster manual from second edition. And we didn't even necessarily call it Dungeons and Dragons. We just called it, we're going to go tell stories. And that started in 8th grade, and we played those characters all the way through high school. I joined the Army, and I took probably, a 10-year break or so like that. But when I got back from active duty, the guys were still playing those characters and that world, 7-8 years later, and it was incredible just to hear that. So but in the last, since 5th edition came out, I've been basically nose dove into it, and I eat, sleep, and drink D&D when I'm not doing the real world stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's incredible. I certainly know a lot of players that you actually find a handful of them on the Minor Realm Games Twitch, and part of the company in the groups. We all sort of share that as maybe we weren't playing rules as written, but we were definitely playing D&D, or we were playing tabletop RPG. And I think that's a powerful thing to be said, to be considered. Is that the core of this all is immersion and fantasy and role playing, playing pretend, playing make believe, and I think that the roots of that are certainly embedded earlier before you ever before you ever pick up a book. So
for sure. So your favorite class to play as a player, and I know you run the games more often than not, but as a way to play, what class of the traditional D&D character classes do you like to play the most?
It's tough. Today is all about characters. I was trying to think all day in preparation for the show of kind of thinking back, because I've created so many characters over the years, Alex, but none of them were player characters. I only have a handful. I'd say I can count on one hand in the last decade all of the player characters that I've played. So I guess from a class perspective, are we talking just like 1st through 5th edition? Anything really goes?
Yeah, I think that, because that's probably the most common thing that people will understand. So yeah, okay. 1st through 5th.
Okay. I would say that, quite honestly, my first character and a character that I'd love to get back to again is a barbarian. From a class perspective, I really just like the ruggedness, the rawness, the ability to lean into the role play of a barbarian, whether it's, I played this human barbarian for a little while, and he was just sort of a rugged, old, wretched, stiff, and unapproachable sea dog. He was an old veteran, and awesome. And he just he was a ship hand, he was a worker, a laborer for most of his life. And he got all this muscle on him, and he just was a brute and didn't get along with most anybody very well. But when it came to getting in between, injustice and villainy and the likes of humankind and innocent societies being corrupted by that or potentially harmed by that, he would sort of hulk out, and he would definitely work alongside and cooperate with adventuring guilds and parties that had like-mindedness in doing what was morally right. And so I like the gentle giant approach in a barbarian. I also just like that over the years in the barbarian subclass / proper class that we've just really we've really provided this extra lens of exposure into the rage and the abilities that come with that, that really just say that there is sort of this Jekyll and Hyde that a character can become whenever they are maddened enough and provoked enough to enter this berserk or animalistic like style of combat. I think it's just cool. It's neat. I think you can do a lot more than just roll and chuck dice with a barbarian. I think you can tell cool stories with them. Yeah. So I think when I go back to the table as a player again, I might want to play a barb.
That's awesome. Lately, I've been thinking about a turtle barbarian, just because I'm a ridiculous lover of turtles, and the whole, again, like you said, so many layers to the barbarian class, especially in 5th edition. Just really excited to kind of like jump into that one. For me, like it's the fighter. I feel like they're so versatile in so many different things. And then again, in 5th edition, all of the different subclasses. If you just want to be the guy who hits things, Well, I mean, you get so many opportunities to do that, but if you also, you want to be the battle master and put things together and, use that's also exciting. So, or you want to sling some spells, the Eldritch Knight is there. And it's just, I think that the fighter for me is one of the most versatile and super fun classes to play, personally.
Oh yeah. I mean, the 5e fighter is just it's just out of control. I mean, and I think fighters proper really have always had their place of, in the Holy Trinity, and you have that frontline DPS tank, whatever you want to call them. The mid tier kind of battle master in 5e is like just, it's a step further than that. They're a tactical master, essentially, like a tactician of sorts. Like all of the extra moves and postures and things, all of the extra class features. There's a lot to play with there from a mechanics standpoint. So really cool. I mean, super cool.
For sure. And so I know we've talked about this, you and I have talked about this offline in the real world, but this is just a perfect transition. Like the Battle Master fighter in the real world is the type of class that I feel that I would be, because I've been in the Army for 15 years and I'm a huge fan of military history and tactics and all of those things. So taking just a line from the book, if, not every fighter absorbs lessons from history or theory, but you've got to use so many different other things, from like calligraphy to weaponsmiths. Like you've got to be a well-rounded person to be the battle master. And in the real world, that's what I think I would be. What about yourself?
I think that every character that I've played, and especially NPCs over the years, have certainly included extensions of myself. I think that's something that remains to be true for all players, to some extent. So I think about different classes and how I personally see myself as a character class. And I always find myself somewhere in between, like the bard of, performing, helping, aiding, certainly talking, trying to be charismatic, trying to always sort of mitigate and moderate situations. Certainly better as a sort of a sidecar than a front line. And I think that whether I would probably be like a valor bard in real life in some extent. Right. I also think like I'm definitely a scientifically motivated person. I'm a technically driven person, just from my career and my background. And as much as I love linguistics and entertainment and being a musician and also being like a really good support and aid, I also could fancy myself as like an evocation wizard that's just spent most of his life in research and study and never really got out to the battlefield or was very much interested in questing. So, yeah.
I thought I almost thought you were going to say the artificer because of your technicality. You're technically proficient in so many different ways and all of that. So I half expected the tinkering aspect of the artificer to come up, but I can definitely, especially with your performing background and being in the band, the bard kind of really does scream at me from the time that I was like, oh yeah, absolutely, that makes perfect sense. And the storytelling, the College of Valor is kind of exactly what the class that once you said bard, I was like, oh yes, it's absolutely going to be the Valor bard, like 100%.
Yeah, or lore. I like to say the Valor because I like the little bit of edginess that comes with that. But yeah, I could certainly have grew up in the college. I mean, I went to school for English literature, so I literally went to the College of Lore.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah. All right. So into character construction now. All right. We know we've all got these players that want to just get every last drop of awesomeness out of their characters. Okay. And I'm guilty of it. I I mean, if I can squeeze something extra out of my character build, I'm absolutely all about it. But how do we encourage players to put meaningful flaws in, or let me rephrase that. How do we encourage players to put meaningful flaws into their characters that don't ruin their fun?
I think that's it's certainly an interesting question. It makes me think. I know that we've talked about this a little bit before. I think when it comes to meaningful flaws, I think a lot about a nice way to do that, I guess, is like secrets. I think the fibs thing with the backgrounds and all that sort of the intention behind it is good, but I don't know necessarily if players really relate to that very much. To be honest, I think I like the idea of having a secret that your character knows and that they will only reveal to certain individuals over a select period of time. I think you start there. If there's something that is important enough and private enough to that character that they aren't willing to tell the people that they adventure along the countryside with and stick their neck out for one another in the battlefield, then that's a pretty important secret. Yeah. So I think about flaw is inherently comes with this sort of negative consequence, implication with it. I like secret. I like to think, what do you have associated with this character that you don't necessarily want anybody else to know right now? Now, I also think that when you have sort of the certain mentalities around player character builds with players is I want to be great at everything. I want to be a jack of all trades or better, right? Or a master of so many things. I like to kind of think that there is a mortal humanistic element to your character's development. So when you say flaw, I think a little bit more about, well, if I'm really, really intelligent, then I'm also probably not going to be the same person in some cases that lifts the bar off of the two doors, and that's protecting those inside, that sort of thing.
Right.
If I'm extremely charismatic, then I may not be the same person that has expertise in in history and academia. There's something to be said for falling on your face a little bit and trying to do things and experimenting in things. There's also, for me, I really think that weaknesses and or deficits in certain areas make characters more colorful.
I 100% agree.
So I think, to me, I think it's what you wouldn't. I mean, let's just be realistic. We don't advertise things to strangers we meet. Companies when we're job interviewing. Everybody's a top performer on their resume, right? And we don't. There's just certain things that you don't shake somebody's hand or introduce yourself for the first time. We're not shaking hands anymore in the universe, but when you introduce yourself, that you don't say, "Hey, by the way, I often sleep in a little bit too long on weekends, and I'm a procrastinator." You know what I mean? So,
right.
So, like, what about that character's sense of self? Might they not advertise, or what might they think they not want another to know? And then something maybe historical or attached to a memory, or something that maybe drives a certain personality or characteristic or trait in them. That sort of stuff. I like to think about that and lean into that and play with it a little bit.
Now, how would you go about, running the game, how would you go about pulling those secrets or so forth out from, or maybe not pull, but like give opportunities for those players to give that sprinkle to their compatriots at the table?
Yeah, I think that's just kind of being really sensitive to the character development piece of it. If you have a table that's role play driven and they want to engage in something like storytelling, secret telling, giving characters depth and giving them their own sort of arc and sense of importance, as a GM, then you should write to that, acknowledge that secret, acknowledge how important that might be to that individual character, and start formulating ideas, in your own lab with your pen and paper or your laptop, on how you might introduce a scenario which would present itself or conceivably present itself for a character to bring that forth, right?
Yeah.
If a character
Awesome.
knows that, if a character tells the party that they grew up in this kingdom and their entire lives are spent in this civilization, and they know this kingdom like better than anyone, like the back of their hand, but all the while they're lying to them because they were orphaned and they were left in the woods, to float down a river, and they're barely civilized at all. They sort of just mimic everybody else around them. Then maybe it'd be a good opportunity whenever they're stranded out in those very same woods to acknowledge to the party that, I actually grew up here. I know exactly the way the river flows. Something to that extent, right? I just made that up off the top of my head.
I like that. That's good.
But that's, setting and background. That also, right? If they're trying to hide something like that, right, that I just said in this sort of just one-off example, something that's so important and meaningful to that character, it's probably going to be responsible or mapped to or parsed to other character traits as well. Hesitance of trustworthiness and reluctance, poor communication skills, that sort of thing. Loyalty, perhaps, to those that show loyalty and friendship and kindness to them, right? Because they don't know much else from that. So there's a lot of things that can come out of that when you really start to open that Pandora's box of characters.
I love it. So accidentally, we just created a beautiful segue to my next question. So everybody's got a backstory, and the vast majority of characters that I've come across in Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role playing is the orphan, or my mom and dad loved me too much, so I had to go out and do it on my own, or this evil guy, the goblins came and killed my family, so I want to go and get revenge. So how do we as players, how do you avoid the cliche character backgrounds without, they're cliche because they work and they're great, they truly are, but how do you make them not feel old and stale with those? How do you build those up?
Yeah, so this comes up a lot. I think there's a couple of things to be said there. Number one, for any Star Wars fans out there, Alex, you're a fan of Star Wars?
Oh, I love Star Wars. All in.
Okay, so Star Wars is a story about really bad dads in outer space.
Absolutely.
So like, there is no Star Wars without a story of a young man not knowing where he comes from, not knowing who his father is, and then in his coming of age, his growth and his evolution, his pathos and his ethos and mythos changing in a meaningful way when he understands more about his own identity and his legacy and his bloodline. And same thing with Harry Potter, right? It's a coming of age story. A boy lost his parents, right? So there's a reason, and those, by the way, just two really modern examples, but all the way through Norse and Icelandic mythology, you see the trend of, losing your parents. So there's a couple of reasons that we pick or we rely on or we write around that trope, and that's because it is great fodder for storytelling.
Right.
We also pick that because we don't want the DM to kill our families. So it's easier to have a hardened, rugged hero and adventurer that doesn't have any ties to anything, because it makes more logical sense that way. That they leave their village because they have nothing else behind, which is rationally why someone might board a ship or an airship or on a horseback or a caravan to travel all around the continent with reckless abandon, because they don't have anything else that they're tied to, right? So it's just really natural for us in remembering our favorite stories, as well as thinking logically, well, if my character doesn't have anything that they care about, then that'll never be used as leverage in the future, or I'll never have to worry about it. My character doesn't have to worry about going back and feeding the cat, sort of thing. That's why we gravitate toward it. So I don't really necessarily take any issue with it. Now, that being said, I think part of what you asked was, how do we add, sort of new life or sort of a fresh take on that? And I think there's a lot of things you can do, right? So my number one rule when it comes to character backgrounds and development is nothing that you really you write or you think about outside of the table regarding your character means nearly as much as what happens to your character at the table during a session. Right. So we think a lot. We like to think a lot about the depth and the story and the influence and the background of a character out of game. Sometimes we don't necessarily think about how much our character grows and changes when things happen to them within this universe, how they respond to certain scenarios, how they interact with the party, how they approach a meaningful conversation or interaction with a non-player character that they may never forget. What they do in moments of adversity and challenge, and when they need to show bravery. It's that those types of things that I think can really separate this battle master fighter that enlisted in the King's Guard whenever he was 16 because his parents got eaten by trolls. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Well, what happens, in the future when the battle master fighter sees two of his party members getting swept up and scooped up by a big bad, and they're the only family that he's known. Well, he's going to defend them with his life, and maybe he dies, in the line of battle in doing so. And we think back of the closing the loop on his legacy is that he died defending the only family that he ever knew, right? And that is a valorous and noble hero's death, which is really cool and epic level play, all from a tropey background that we didn't think too much of, right?
Right. Absolutely. That's well said. I think the tropes they're tropes for a reason because they work. And like you said, they're, Star Wars is a story about bad dads. It works, and it just gives so much fuel to the fire of the character as they're growing and developing. And I think that that's a really exciting thing. And each time that somebody takes and puts their own little sprinkle of, moon dust or whatever they like on that trope, I think it just, you never want it to get stale, and you don't want every time you create a new character, it's like, oh, my mom and dad died when I was a kid, so I want to just do this. I think that keeping it fresh for yourself as a player is really important as well. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I agree. I mean, I was just going to say, I agree. Also, there's nothing wrong with not having a backstory.
Yeah, for sure.
I think about that a lot too. It's like, maybe I'm just like a water elemental, genasi, and I don't really know much about my background. And I've just sort of been roaming around the northern coasts of this environment for most of my life as a fisherman and a hermit, and that's really about it. Like that's just all you need to know. Well, what spurred them into joining the adventuring party? Well, one day they came to town to get some supplies. They saw some injustices or some travesties being committed, and they stepped in to intervene. And one thing led to another. They were tired of living sort of this poor and modest, humble, but also challenging life. And they decided to jump in at the opportunity to maybe use the talents that they don't necessarily think of as defense or heroics to make a little coin and to upgrade their lifestyle a little bit. Who knows, that sort of thing. It doesn't have to be elaborate. I always admire when people come in with 4 or 5 page sort of things. I certainly like whenever they know exactly what they want to know about their character. I will say it makes it a little more challenging for me sometimes to say, hey, by the way, some of those things we're going to work with them. Some of the things we may not get to because it just doesn't necessarily jive with the world, but it helps. Thank you. I don't think there's anything wrong with somebody just saying, hey, I want to play this monk, and they're a tabaxi monk. They came from the snowy hills or whatever, and they're a great fighter, and they like doing right, and they met up with the party somewhere along the way. Or maybe you're just doing the introduction in a tavern sort of trope, or however you want to do it, and they're here because they're motivated by X, and that's it. And then if you want to think of something else, then maybe drive that secret component or whatever else into it.
Yeah. All right. So last little topic here, you brought up families, and if you have a family in the world, if you don't have a family in the world, the DM can't kill them, or you don't have to go back and feed the cat or anything like that. But if the player creates a character that does have a family, And let's like, do you think that gives them instant right now buy-in in the world, or does it get them invested right now? And then to the next level of that, like, what about children and like significant others, like after the character is made, like developing and role playing that aspect of that character development?
Yeah, I've seen this happen a time or two in my games over the years. It certainly adds a lot of additional opportunity for creative role playing. A family man's or a woman's engagement with their loved ones could really lend itself for opportunity to set up an HQ, right, or a home base. Hey, come back to the wife and I's home. We can keep you guys, in the den for the evening next to the fire. My wife Mary will make you a large roast, and we'll have a feast this evening. Right? That could be one component how you can use that, in a utility sense of, hey, we have somewhere to post up. We have somewhere to sort of take the long rest or save or do some natural sort of healing. And there's also the other component of what drives this player. Where do their particular ideals or motivations stand? When they're looking in the face of danger or potential death, they're probably thinking of that family in that moment, and that could really impact how that character makes decisions. Potentially how valorous and brave and brazen-headed they are, potentially how tactical and strategic and reserved and conservative they are in some ways as well. So really depending on the circumstance. So I really like it because it gives that player some additional depth. It gives them anchors, I think, as you said, into the world. You said something to the effect of sort of gets them immersed more easily. It gives them sort of that anchors, those tenets into the world. And I really like the thoughtfulness and the mindfulness behind, hey, I want this character to feel real and validated and authentic. And in doing so, I've given them a family, and I think that's cool.
I agree. I think that it could be definitely the hook that the DM definitely can go about and be like, well, your village got burned and everybody died. Then that's just, now you're especially for the barbarian that you're going to develop next time you're a player character, the village and his family gets burned alive, and now this is the fuel for his barbarian rage for the rest of the world. For the rest of the time. So, Bill, this has been absolutely fantastic. I am very honored that you would brought me in with Minor Realm Games and to do the side quest here with you. And I can't wait to do this again.
This is a lot of fun, man. I'm really enjoying getting out there, playing games, talking about something that we all love. Alex, absolute pleasure. To everybody listening at home, thank you so much for your subscriptions, for your listenership. You can catch Minor Realm Games every other Sunday on Twitch, playing our original module, Clock Strike Zero. Look out for new episodes of RealmCast and RealmCast SideQuest every other Thursday here on YouTube, as well as Spotify and all places that you can find podcasts starting June 2020. And thank you so much again for all of your hard work and charitable donations in campaigning for worthy nonprofits. So on behalf of Alex, my name's Bill. We are Minor Realm Games, and have a great day. See you next time.